Hi, Jennifer.
I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, this is very exciting for me. You guys know I'm Broadway Girl NYC. I go to the theater all the time. I'm sort of known for my professional fandom. I am a complete amateur when compared to Jennifer Ashley Tepper.
I wouldn't say amateur. We're like,
No, you are an encyclopedia of information in a way that I could never dream of being.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm so glad that you are writing this series of books. This is the third book in the Untold Stories of Broadway series. And as you can see, this is a pretty hefty tome. And now there are 3 of them, and I believe there are going to be 6 total in the series, right?
Yes. So each book goes through 8 Broadway theaters, and I got to get to them all.
Right. But you might do the math and go, there are 40 Broadway theaters. Shouldn't that only be 5 volumes?
Each book actually includes a lost theater, like a Broadway theater that was demolished, or that's no longer in use as a Broadway house, which is a cool, way to do it.
So I want to get to some of the stories that you uncovered in doing the research for this book. I know that in addition to talking to actors and musicians and stage managers, you've also talked to ushers and house managers and doormen and stuff. But before we do that, I know that you are sort of the quintessential Broadway historian of the moment. I want to know, what resources do you use as a historian other than Google?
That's a great question. I've spent so much time at the New York Public Library. It's amazing. I've spent a lot of time at the Library of Congress recently, which is also great. But there's a lot of great online archives. Like if you want to read a review from the 60s, the New York Times has all of that online, so does Variety. You can kind of spend hours digging through history online in a really cool way in all these search engines.
You told a story in a post online recently about doing some research into Jonathan Larson at the New York Public Library.
You know what? I think I haven't said this out loud or to anyone, but I think I'll say it here. I'm going to do a concert next year that's all lost and unheard Jonathan Larson work. All stuff that's not from Rent, not from Tick, Tick, Boom, his completely unheard stuff. That is the first time that's being said out loud, so that's cool. And I've been spending a lot of time at the Library of Congress with his papers, which are 50 completely well-curated boxes of every, lyric notepad and just notes of him working as a waiter and writing call ASCAP, call Lincoln Center, try to get a workshop, all of these very personal papers and drafts of scripts, and it's been incredibly cool to research all of that.
Wow. I'm jealous of you for having access to that stuff, but I guess it's available to the public, right?
It's true. I've been freaking out over, oh my God, look at this original draft of this lyric from Rent, how awesome. And people are like, wow. And I'm like, you can go there and you can read it yourself. I didn't actually get permission to do the research, just to do the concert. So it's all open to the public. There's a lot of great stuff at the library in New York too.
Well, there's so much of it that I'm glad that you're going through and putting the stuff that we need to know all in one place. I know you grew up in Florida. You were a sort of self-made theater lover through cast albums, pre-internet. You went to theater camp, and then is it true you only applied to NYU because you could not see going to school anywhere else?
It's true. My mom's in the audience, and she remembers being just horrified but supportive about this, that I said, I'll just chain myself to my bedroom and reapply till I get in. It's NYU or bust. That's all I want. And actually, my freshman dorm room's around the corner from here, so I used to walk by this building every day. Very magical.
Well, I could tell just from having been in the same circle as you for the last few years how supportive your family is, because sometimes I'll see you and your mom and your sister at a Joe Iconis concert and you're all yelling like you're at a Backstreet Boys show or something ah!
It's true. It's very much a team effort. And my whole family, no one was working in theater, but everyone really loved it from the time I was very young. I used to ask for 8 cast albums for Hanukkah every year. It would be these are my 8 that I want.
Did you always get the best one on the 8th day?
No, my mom was very thorough in research. So I'd be I want Lacusa Wild Party on day 1 and Lipa Wild Party day 4, so I have time to know the first one before I get the second one. It was very calculated, and she was very awesome about fulfilling those dreams. But yeah, I grew up in Florida, so I studied theater from afar. I always wanted to be in New York, but I only visited 3 times before I moved here. So it was very much I'm going to study these shows. I'm going to learn what musical theater is from cast albums and books and the Tony Award broadcasts. And then soak it all in when I come here a few times. But so when I moved here, I was just in heaven.
Yeah, and you went straight to work. While you were still in school, you were working on Title of Show, on its transfer to Broadway, and then you were whose assistant were you after that?
I was Michael Greif's
Greif's
assistant,
assistant, right,
for
yeah.
about a year. Yeah.
And then you went and worked in a producer's office, and now you're the program director at Feinstein / 54 Below.
Yes.
Why this? I've heard you say like it's important to say the slash. Why is that?
It's not that important to say it. It's just fun. We like to call it the slash. It's like our slang term for the venue.
Which is also known as Broadway's living room, and that's where you go and you find like anything from Patti LuPone in a little 150-seat room to the reunion concert of Smile, which is a show that didn't run for very long, and then you might see a new musical theater writer who has never really had his work performed in New York City before, and all these shows are. I mean, the way that you've curated that space is such a gift to the whole community.
Thank you. And I have such a good memory of us in that space because Laura and I go way back as pals and colleagues. And we actually saw Ben Vereen at 54 Below before I worked there.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And then he was just back.
And
he actually was here talking about it to promote that show.
So it's all full circle. But yeah, it's been really exciting for a little over 3 years. I've been programming the venue. We do 16 shows a week usually. And it's everything from, as you said, it's, stars, Ben Vereen, Patti LuPone. We just had Laura Osnes. We have Norm Lewis and Michael Feinstein coming up. And then we have emerging artists, people who are just getting their start on Broadway, a lot of first solo shows and things like that. And then we also have, musicals and concert, a lot of shows that haven't been done in a long time. And
plus special events like my annual Tony Awards trivia night that I host.
Super fun. So there's always something crazy going on. It's like a revolving door of Broadway people.
And what's great is that you literally know everyone now. And I think one of the reasons is that you've done 300 some interviews for this Untold Stories of Broadway series.
Yeah.
Some of these stories are so crazy that you'd think that they were fictional. I mean, I remember just reading a few of them. It reminded me of, remember when Smash was on and everyone was like, that would never happen. That could never happen. And we were like, shut up, it's a TV show. Like, just enjoy it. Some of these, if this had shown up on Smash, like, there was a stage manager who once did something very interesting.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. It's really funny. I said the same thing. I was like, if this, again, I thought Smash was realistic because I feel like all I hear are these crazy stories. There's a stage manager named Jerry Adler who was stage managing My Fair Lady in the 50s. And one night as he was like closing down the show after the curtain came down, he heard someone in the audience making a lot of weird noises. It was a woman giving birth in the box. And he ran out and he tried to help the husband get an ambulance, but he ended up delivering a baby in the box seat. And as he told me in his story in the book, he's like, I used to have a razor blade on my tie clip in the 50s, so I was able to cut the umbilical cord, and the baby was born in My Fair Lady in the box seat. So these crazy, literally, if that had happened on Smash, everyone would have been like, that's never happened on Broadway.
What theater was that?
It was when My Fair Lady was at the Broadhurst, so it moved around a bit.
Have you done any research into when the carpet was cleaned or replaced in that box? Because
I haven't, but I do find out like weird things about specific like areas of the theater in a strange way. I don't know about the carpet.
I want to go look in the boxes at the Broadhurst and see if there's like amniotic fluid or something.
I think it's been cleaned by now. I'll give the Schuberts that they've cleaned it. But you really start to think when you're at a show, like, oh, I know exactly what happened in that seat and like in that spot in the orchestra pit. It's really like a physical history of Broadway. That's cool to know.
I have always felt sort of like there are ghosts all around us in some of these theaters. I always think about Raul Esparza when I go into the Barrymore because he's, I think, done the same number of shows that Ethel Barrymore did there. Yeah. And I feel like I can sort of see him on stage in all of his different characters.
He's like one of my favorite interviews because he's like a nerd like you and I. And when I interviewed him, he knew everybody that had been in every dressing room that he'd ever been in himself. He was like, yeah, my dressing room at the Barrymore, like these are the 7 people I learned had occupied it. So he's a super nerd like us.
Oh, that's awesome. But there are some actual theater ghosts, quote unquote, actual ghosts that you've talked about. Which is the most haunted theater on Broadway?
The Belasco is definitely the most haunted, and it's actually in this 3rd volume. You hear a lot of ghost stories. What's crazy about the ghost stories is as I was collecting them, they all correspond in a way that you go, okay, this is a legend. People have been talking about this ghost, but could all of these people in all of these decades really have been describing this ghost the same way? Like it starts to feel pretty spooky. There's a woman in a blue dress who haunts the Belasco, who they say fell down the elevator shaft, who was a woman of David Belasco. Belasco's. And if you put
She belonged to him.
She belonged to him, like they did in the 20s. If you read the book, there's a lot of like how you see that evolve as well. But the ghost, apparently, if you put a woman in a blue dress in your play, she won't haunt you at the Belasco. So Awaken Sing like literally had an actress wearing a blue dress so that the ghost wouldn't come. It's very superstitious at the Belasco.
And how did they handle that with Hedwig? Do you remember?
I think they saw the ghost. I heard a few people during Hedwig talk about, she's walking around. And Laura Linney talks about just like literally seeing her during tech and this ghost walking in the mezzanine. I mean, people really believe in it.
Speaking of women, I know that it was very important to you to make sure that you had a huge range of perspectives in putting these books together, from making sure that you had actors and other theater-related people of color, of making sure you had women, making sure that you had, you focused on octogenarians to fill in the sort of earlier years.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, my goal with the books is always to have them start as early as possible chronologically. So what's been really cool is that, focusing on interviewing octogenarians for this book, almost every chapter starts in the 40s with someone who was actually there. So I got to talk to George S. Irving, he's one of the two remaining original cast members of Oklahoma that's still with us. And just like that incredible history that that person will answer a question that I haven't seen, answered anywhere else. And you go, we have to ask our elders these questions because, the stories are gone when the people are gone. So this book was a lot about getting that. And also, as you said, getting artists of color and women to make sure that those people are part of the narrative, because a lot of the times, as we've seen, they're not necessarily focused on in the history books.
You have managed to get stories out of people that they've never seemed to have told before. I have read and listened to and sort of digested as much as I've been able to. But can you talk about the story that Peter Gallagher told? That, I've been following Peter Gallagher since the early 90s, and I'd never heard him tell this story.
Peter Gallagher is one of the new interviews for book 3, and he was every story he told, he was so generous. He had so many wonderful stories. Actually, there's a few, but I'll try to guess which one you're talking about. I might know. He told this beautiful story about how he was doing theater in the 80s, and then he left to go to Hollywood for a while. And when he came back, he said everyone he had worked with was gone. And it was a different experience than a lot of people in the New York theater community had during the AIDS epidemic, because he really was like, oh, where are all these, all my friends, all the stage managers, all of the actors? And he said it was just like a ghost town. And he describes it in this very devastating way where he really, shares what that time was like. But he also, he has a crazy story about Mike Nichols. He talks about how at one point he thought there was a terrorist attack happening as he was doing The Real Thing. And all of a sudden, like, there were just boom, boom, boom. And it was while New York was on high alert. And he learned that it was actually, you can't take it with you, that the theater shared a wall with in the next house, doing like the fireworks scene. There's a fireworks scene in that play. So he had all these just like vivid memories of shows he had done.
Oh, speaking of theaters that share walls, it isn't just the people that you focus on from these stories. You have managed to tell stories that are almost from the perspective of the buildings themselves.
That's my favorite thing. Thank you.
Well, that's one of my favorite things about the books as well. There are a few sets of theaters that have secret passageways and alleys that they share, and there are some incredible stories about actors who have say like their character died in Act 1, so they went through the secret passage under the stage to the theater next door to watch their friends do it. Act 2 of the other show.
It's my favorite thing because so many of the Broadway theaters are connected through these like secret tunnels and underground passages, which were mainly built so that the theater owners and the people who built them could kind of get around without being seen as often. And now they're used again for like shenanigans. But the Broadhurst and the Schoenfeld, which are both in book 3, are connected through this underground tunnel, even though they're on different streets. So Celia Keenan-Bolger, when she was playing Eponine in Les Mis, she would die and then she would go watch the end of Chorus Line, which I love. But Jeremy Jordan also told me a great one about how during Bonnie and Clyde, which was at one house, Hugh Jackman was doing his show at the other one, and he'd just pop up and be like, it's Hugh. And then it was so crazy. Jerry Adler had a story about when Zero Mostel was doing a show with him at the Broadhurst. He was under investigation by the House of Un-American Activities, and they would sneak him out so that he wouldn't be subpoenaed through the tunnel to the other theater. So just this crazy history of this silly little dusty tunnel.
I feel like you made the kids who like stay at the stage door to get their playbills signed are going to start camping out at all of the other theaters' entrances and exits to try to
spot things.
Yeah, the people who are trying to sneak out of the theater.
There's a lot of cool hidden stuff. You know, the Music Box has this hidden speakeasy behind a door that was built by Irving Berlin during Prohibition.
When are we going?
I know we should go. We will. It's in the house manager's office, and it's literally like behind a wall, like you're watching a mystery movie, and you like push a wall, and then you're like in a secret bar. So
is it functioning?
Yeah, it's functioning. I mean, it's a bar. It's not illegal anymore. But it's really cool how like there's all these hidden spots in the theaters.
I am always impressed by how much you're moving, how many projects you're working on at any given time. You're producing concert series. You've got the books. When I think about how many interviews you've done over the course of the 3 years since the first volume of this book came out, I'm interested to know, like, how many interviews were you doing in a day?
Yeah.
And how did you manage to fit them in around having at least one full-time job throughout that entire time?
What was so crazy was, for the first volume, I did 200 interviews in the course of 1 year. So for each additional volume, it's like there's only 25 to 30, additional interviews. But that first volume was like the year of, running around Manhattan talking to people. And I was just thinking about this crazy day I had where I did 5 interviews in one day. And it was literally like 10 a.m., noon, 2 p.m., 4 p.m. And the city became kind of a character in the books because I was interviewing everybody in their apartment or in their workplace or backstage at their theater, and it became a character in the interviews, which was really cool. This one day, I interviewed William Ivy Long, a costume designer extraordinaire, in his studio in Tribeca. Then I went in the Heights, and I interviewed Lin-Manuel Miranda. Haha, very funny. Then I interviewed Danny Burstein in Central Park on a bench, like near Columbia. Then I went down to Lincoln Center, and I interviewed Andre Bishop in his office. And then I interviewed Ann Bobby, like in a bar at Serafina later that night. And it was like these 5 interviews. That was in like 12 hours. It was crazy.
Do you ever think back to, I'm sure you do, to you saving up your money to get the In Trousers out of print cast recording?
Oh my God.
And just pinch yourself and go like, okay,
do.
little Jen Tepper, we made it.
Bill Finn was like it for me. Like it was like Bill Finn. He was my favorite growing up. In Trousers was my favorite. And the other day I emailed him about something I wanted to do, and he called me immediately, and he said yes, which is really cool. But he called me. I picked up the phone, not thinking it was him, and it was Finn. It's Tepper, it's Finn. And I just literally, I couldn't even tell that story just now. It's so like getting to kind of be around your heroes and have them call you and like, tell you it's them on the phone. It's been very extraordinary.
Well, you have your own sort of next generation of theater fans that are looking up to you. And I'm sure you get calls all the time from people who say like, I want to be you when I grow up.
My favorite thing that I hear from young people and students reading these books is when they talk about the jobs that they learned about in the books, because there's so many great things you can do in the theater that people don't think about when they're younger, or there's not specific training programs for. And the books, they tell so many stories about being a house manager or being an agent or being an advertising executive, and to have students say, oh, I didn't realize how like cool a musical director's job was. That's like my favorite thing that kids say about the books, and it's something that I wish I had a resource about when I was that age.
Well, they've also learned from you that you can kind of make your own way. You can design your own job if you keep doing what you're passionate about and keep. It seems to me that you've never been afraid to just ask, because the worst thing that someone can do is to say no.
Absolutely.
When you were living right around here, you have a great Marvin Hamlish story.
I was just thinking about that. I went to NYU. I lived right around the corner, and NYU. Actually, what's crazy is I always think about this in this area. Philip Seymour Hoffman and I had the same freshman dorm room, which I learned because when he sadly passed, his freshman roommate posted this lovely message with a picture of them in their dorm room, and I was like, "That's my room. That's my room number." So I feel very honored, and I think about that when I walk by. But anyway, Marvin.
It's always been about the real estate. Like you've always had a connection to the real estate.
It's like Raoul knowing who was in his dressing room. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman was in my dorm room. Marvin Hamlish, I wrote to him when I put together this kind of show at NYU on my own with a bunch of other students. Actually, the person who put it together with me was Jay Johnson, who's now still one of my good friends and a Broadway star. And we invited Marvin Hamlish to come see it because we had some songs of his in the show. And he not only came to see it after I wrote to him, but he came and spoke to us, just like these motley crew of NYU students. And he was telling us about the original chorus line, and he said he wasn't married yet when it came out. He was was dating, and he used to take girls, and they'd be like, "I love this show," and he'd be like, "I wrote this, baby."
Best line. Look, I'd
We were
fall for it.
enchanted. And he was he was lovely, and he didn't have to do that. He went out of his way, and I love having that memory with him.
It reminds me of when I had Lonnie Price here to talk about, I mean, look, we're running out of time, so we can't get into how much you love Merrily We Roll Along. But he told me about how he wrote to Hal Prince and said, like, "Hey, can I come work for you?" And Hal Prince was like, "Okay."
Yeah. You just have to ask. You really just have to ask. That Merrily documentary is the best, and everyone should see it.
And I noticed you got some special thanks in
Yes.
there, and I know you helped track down some of the original footage for it. So
Yeah. There's also, Merrily's my favorite show, so there's a lot of stuff on it in these books.
actually, I'll never forget back when, so my whole online presence was anonymous for a long time, and Jen and I knew each other in real life, but we also knew each other online, and I was like ready to reveal my identity to her, and I said, "You have to promise you're not going to tell," and she goes, "I swear on Merrily."
That's how you know it's real, Laura.
I knew it was real, and then and you were in on it ever since from then on.
It was a good secret.
We have time to take a couple questions from the
Sure.
audience.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hey.
Thank you for being here. Such a fan. Your writing is amazing, especially your Facebook posts. Like, you had a post a while ago about understudies, which was so fascinating and amazing. And so thank you for sharing your perspective. What show do you think is in desperate need of a revival?
It's a great question. I always used to say falsettos, and now they've done it perfectly, so I do have a new answer. But there's this show called The Human Comedy that I've been obsessed with forever. The music is by Galt McDermott, who wrote Hair. The show was this big hit at the public in the 80s, and then it had a kind of unsuccessful transfer to Broadway. And it's this beautiful show about like this community going through a lot of loss because there's a war going on overseas. And it's just, it's this gorgeous, relevant musical that nobody knows. I'm saying this, and I'm like, nobody's like, yeah, that's what I thought too. It's one of those like undiscovered ones that I have just dreams about it coming back and happening again.
Cool.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. I was wondering if there was ever a story you came across that you really wanted to put in your book, but maybe you couldn't find enough information on it or get it confirmed.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I interviewed a woman named Sylvia Bailey, who is an usher at Phantom. She's in her 90s. She's ushered there every day since it opened. She's like the life force of the Majestic Theater. And she, in the 40s in New York, was a dancer. She started out as a dancer. And she gave me some like amazing stories of her memories of coming up in New York. And we couldn't figure out, like she described, she almost made it to Broadway once in a show, and she describes the show, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I dug through like papers and papers, and we know a couple people involved, we know a couple details, but I'm hoping that someone reads this book and tweets at me like, "Oh, I know what show that was in the 40s," because I included it anyway, even though we didn't have the full story, but I'm hoping we get it someday.
And you've had a couple of people who have gone on the record with you and then been like, "I need to pull myself off the record."
Absolutely. To tell you the truth, I have a document on my desktop called Off the Record that someone has to delete it if something happens to me, because it's just all those stories. And sometimes I think people talk and then they go, "You know what, that's not for everybody," and that makes sense to me.
Maybe you can go back to them in a few years and be like, "Can we just like statute of limitations on this?"
That could happen.
Somehow.
Just publish that document unedited.
We have time for one more question, but first I want to just say, if you go on YouTube and you search the term "if it only even ran a minute," if it only even runs a minute, I knew I was going to get it wrong. This is a concert series that Jennifer's been producing for many years that focuses on underappreciated musicals and includes the cast and the crew members and the artistic teams from those shows, and has done a really wonderful job of bringing material that's never been out there before, made it available, and that's just been a huge gift. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, we have our next one is in January, so you can come see it live too.
Great. Let's take one more question.
Hi, Jen. And unfortunately, the last two questions were my two questions, but it's okay because I did get the answers. But I wanted to ask you about, you talked earlier about you becoming an actual character. With your experience with putting on productions, would you consider this the Untold Stories on Broadway?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. What's so funny is like the books cover so many years and so many topics that you could get, you could do something specific with it, or you could just kind of make the whole story a live production at some point.
We need to get some composer lyricists to take each chapter and make a little mini play, a little musical.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah,
I'm into it.
Do you know who I could pitch at Feinstein/54 Below to make that a concert?
Yeah, we could do that. We've done a couple similar things, and we'll get on it soon.
Amazing. Jennifer, these books are incredible. I want to show you again. This is one of 3 It'll give you plenty of reading material. Excellent holiday gift, too, by the way. And it can be found anywhere that books are sold, right?
Books, bookstores, Amazon, dresscirclepublishing.com. Just go and get it.
And everyone follow Jen at Jen Ash Tepp on Twitter.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.